Good afternoon. Thank you very much. It's really wonderful to be able to welcome you all and to also welcome Paola and Bernardo. Let me just start, since I don't have really a formal introduction, just with a little bit of personal background. I finished architecture school in 1976. And after that, in 1977, 78, started a series of studios with a colleague of mine who had been my teacher, and his name is Dalibor Vesely. He's Czech, and this was in London and Cambridge, and we were involved in a series of studios. Which was called, at that time it was a unit, it was called Unit 1, and we were working on a series of projects about the city. And about the same time or earlier, I had also gone to study with Joseph Rickwert. And Joseph Rickwert was a very close friend, is a close friend of Vittorio Gregotti. And so, even though I was in London, we had this situation where there was a very deep understanding, because this teacher of mine had come from Prague, of the idea of the European city. It wasn't just about England and about London and the history, but it was really about the European city, and especially from the perspective of this kind of Middle European or Central European perspective, and which in some ways is more European than even the rest of Europe because of its isolation to some degree. During that time, in the 60s, when he had been there, creates an incredible intellectual culture about the city, but its relationship also to aesthetics, to philosophy, and so on. And so we were very fortunate to really have this focus on the study of the city that was seen as a holistic enterprise. It wasn't just about urban design. You know, it was not just a professional operation. It was really a much more culturally grounded idea of the city. And for him, it tied into discussions around phenomenology and other things that people like Gregotti were also sympathetic to this discussion. Through these involvements, I also had the opportunity to meet Vittorio Gregotti a few times. And once I started sort of teaching in 77, 78, then we had a series of studios, and we were also very interested in what was happening about the city. On the one hand, we had these discussions that were around, even though there weren't that many publications, about the work of Colin Rowe, and Colin Rowe was part of these discussions, and then also Aldo Rossi was very much part of this discussion. But there was also, a few years later, something that we were aware of, and which was really the status and role of Casabella. And for me, there was a time when people really used to read Casabella. I don't know if people read Casabella that much today, but it was a time. And I think many of the reasons were because of the fact that the journal at that time had a very strong approach towards writing about architecture and writing about the city. And it always had this editorial that would be Vittorio at the beginning, and it also had many times these texts that were done by Bernardo Secchi about the city. But they were really very important to us because they were articles and arguments about the approach to the understanding and making and the idea of the project for the contemporary city. I think this is. The other thing that today we are very interested in the school, for example, about the whole discussion of the territory, the idea of large-scale projects, and really the role of geography as part of this. I think I would also say that Bernardo was one of the first people to really discuss the city in terms of this discussion, this bigger discussion of the territory, and to really be interested in geography, I think. So you have some of these examples of these articles, many of them from the mid-80s, and plus some other things. So there is a piece that I think Vittorio did on the whole discussion around modification, the idea of modifying the city. A lot of conversations that we have today is about the historic city. What do you do about the historic city? In what way do you have to modify it? What is the role of the project? Is it preservation? Is it conservation? Is it something that's new? And so on. And of course, the articles of Bernardo that we have, the conditions aren't the same, the reconstruction of the city, the project of the site, and this idea of descriptive urbanism. And I think they are both understanding the city from a historical perspective, but they're actually discussing it in the manner of a project that needs to be addressed. This is not a historian writing about the history of the city. This is someone who is really involved in the discussions about how you make the project for the contemporary city. I think this is something that, for example, in the context of American academia is being very rare, I would say, because we have a division between planning and urban design. The idea of planning as a project fundamentally rooted in the social sciences, which often is not project-based, it's policy-based, and so in this school we are trying to make planning as a project-based planning, as well as policies, but really to emphasize the role of the project. And also I think it's been interesting and important, the value of the writings of Bernardo, but also really the role of Cazabella during this period, because of the way in which there is a fusion between planning and urbanization, or planning and urban design. And urban design, as was sort of invented here as a school, is really very much in tandem, is very consistent with the European project in the sense that it is the architecture of the city. But I would say that what Bernardo was doing is more than the architecture of the city in terms of urban design being architecture for the city, that it's really dealing with this larger scale where there are themes and issues that come up, and the addressing of those themes and issues transcend sometimes some of the problematic aspects of urban design that I would say that tend to limit it towards scenography, towards the idea of the making of a scenery that looks like the city. And the fundamental problem, for example, with American-based urban design projects, many of the offices, is that this is still how it works. That is, we have an idea about an architecture, and then we have an idea of a city that utilizes some of that architecture to look like, in a way, the city. So I think it's very relevant that we're having this discussion, because in the school we are actually very much dealing with these issues of the large scale, of the relationship between landscape and urbanization, the connections between planning and urban design, the role of the contemporary city. I think they're very much at the forefront of the discussions, whether it's in urban design or in planning. But I think it's also very, very relevant to have your contribution to this discussion. So I just thought that it was a fantastic opportunity that we have both Paola here and Bernardo, and that it would be great to do two things: to ask Bernardo to talk a little bit about some of his writings, and perhaps bringing that in a way to some of the discussions of the present, and then the collaboration that has existed between Paola and Bernardo on projects, to then see also some projects that I think Paola is going to run through very quickly, just to give some evidence in a way about this experience of what has come, because at that time it was fundamentally a theoretical project, these writings. So now we have also exemplars, and then after that we will have a conversation together. We hope that Bernardo will be done by 1 o'clock, and that or sooner, and then Paola will then talk for 5-10 minutes quickly, and then we will continue until 1:30. So I'm rushing everybody and giving time so that we can try to have a discussion, because we really want it to be more in the spirit of something informal and conversational. But I'm very happy that you're both here, and I'm happy that you are here. So Bernardo, thank you very much. And please.
I thank you.
Good.
Practically, I have nothing to add. And but what I can add is that if I look backward to the experience, we did Casabella, Vittorio, Gregotti, and me. We did Casabella since '84 till '96, and it was a very pleasant adventure. Every month we wrote an article in Casabella, and every Saturday Saturday morning we were meeting in the office of Vittorio Gregotti, discussing with some friends in a free way, without a problem. We were meeting and discussing. And it was very useful for us. I think for me, for Vittorio Gregotti, André Corbeau, the main author in this period of history, was very useful to have different ideas. Maybe I'm mainly an urbanist. Vittorio is mainly an architect. I insist on mainly because we are not exclusively, and André Corbeau mainly an historian. And different point of view, different way to look to the city, but the same problems. And if I look now to this experience, I'm a little bit pessimistic. But I read my articles, the articles like Gregotti, and I found that they are not so bad. They are not so bad. The problems that we were proposing are important. Maybe some of them are important also today. But the fact of what we did was absolutely not perceived. The architectural culture, they took another way, and Casabella today is different. Maybe it's less important. It's less important than, but I think so. The debate when we were writing in Casabella, meeting somebody everywhere in Europe, your article. There was a great participation to now, and that is a problem. That is a problem because if you write, is to convince somebody that he has to follow to go ahead in what you are proposing. So this, let's say, failure of this period, I can explain why that was happening, but it's not so simple to explain. So what was our starting point? Our starting point was that we were observing a greater dispersion of languages, architectural languages, that had no legitimacy. And it appeared to us something that was the way in which everyone, architect and promoter, not only architect, were expressing himself and not taking account of whatever the problems of the city. unfortunately, urbanism in this period had a very bad reputation, I have to say. You know that the previous period, the 70s, were in Europe, in general, were very conflictual years. And the social conflict this year showed that the way in which urbanists were doing their projects, the way that is coming from Van Hesteren and the Amsterdam Plan of 35, a plan based, fundamentally based on zoning, and this complex machinery of juridical machinery of zoning was completely unuseful. And that it was impossible to give an answer to the right of the city to use the words of Lefebvre with this kind of thing. But it was also impossible to give an answer to the right of the city with some nice object, because architecture was very nice, some nice object located somewhere with a criteria that were not immediately understandable. And more than this, two main experiences, Barcelona by Boigas and IBA in Berlin by Clayus, in this situation appeared to be ambiguous, not clear, not proposing a program of research for architecture and urbanism at the same time. Barcelona was made, the idea of Barcelona was to have some punctual projects that were giving a new meaning to the entire city. Something that with Tafuri, after we started to call the Renovatio Urbis, remembering the Renovatio Urbis of 16th century. And we adopted this we adopted this policy in Antwerp. Okay, so, but the Renovatio Urbis was just to find a criterion in order to give legitimacy to the choices of location, program, and architecture. On the one side. On the other side, the IBA by Clayus, that started with the same program, became something of nostalgic of the 18th century. And Paola could remember a very strong debate that we had, Clayus and me, in Sweden, in Malmö, when Clayus was saying, Bernardo, convinced, you have to be convinced that the 18th century city, European city, is the best city you did. I refuse this, obviously. It's impossible that we cannot go ahead. So our statement, our position, if you want, were very simple. The first is that we have to start from a keen observation of the territory. That was André Corbeau, Vittorio Gregotti, and me. The territory has an attitude, cannot accept every kind of project, as an attitude, not in a deterministic way, but what is possible and what which are the opportunities that the territory is offering needs a very keen observation. First. The influence of André Corbeau was very strong on this. Secondly, that we are not in a period, 80s, we are not in a period in which we have to do something that is new on a tabula rasa. That we don't fill the city of extraordinary images. We have to to be more sophisticated. And we have to act with some very small displacement of the meaning of the objects, inserting our projects that don't need to be big projects, but inserting our project in what is existing. And the novel Modification was a word that we get from a novel by Michel Bouton. Maybe you know that, it's a very famous novel. And that was our philosophy, let's say. Not an approach as was the approach of avant-garde, but an approach that was at the same time, for us, more modest, if you want, but more sophisticated. And that was the second point. The reference, if you want, the reference was on one side to Igor Stravinsky. After the Russian ballet, after le Sacre du Printemps, after Petrushka, Igor Stravinsky perceived the need to give more stability to the music language. And he explained that the reason why I'm quoting Igor Stravinsky, he explained this here, not in this building because it was not existing in 39. 39 he did he was lecturing here in Harvard, and he explained why he wrote Oedipus Rex at the end of the 20s, and he explained why he wrote Oedipus Rex, and why he perceived the need, after a period of dispersion of musical languages, to give more dignity, he was saying, to the music. Our approach was more or less the same, and especially Vittorio Gregotti was thinking to the architecture as an art of variations. Variation as a classical music from Bach to a theme, there is a theme, and you work on this theme by many variations. My references were different, I have to say. Our references were very frequently to the music. I don't know why, maybe because of the study of music, and so my reference was mainly to Schoenberg. Schoenberg, as it was read by Charles Rosen. Charles Rosen is an American critic, and in a very fantastic book. That is to work with deconstructing the different materials. I'm speaking of the city, the music, but to deconstruct the different materials, to go deeper in their genealogy, Foucault, and to understand what is happening if we change the way in which the different materials are combined. So working on the different sequences, working on the different elements that we use to build the city, what gave rise to the elementaristic approach. This girl near me, Città Elementare, the elementary city, and to understand what we can do with this. And I think also today I think that this is also an important approach. That is not immediately to think a new image of the city, a whole image of the city, but to work more deeply on the bricks of that imply very technical also, very technicalism, not only aesthetics, not only. And this was a main program of Casabella in this in this period, with some different opinions on me, Gregotti, and Jean-Louis Cohen, that was very frequently in the Saturday morning meetings, and Jacques Blair, and so on. Casabella was a very collective work, not only. I don't know why I use this, because after. But slowly I was pushed to understand that the language dispersion in architecture was very difficult, if not impossible, or maybe also wrong to fight against it. Why maybe wrong? Because something was happening in the society, and we are getting out of. For me, you have a language, also in the architecture, a unified language, when a social class is hegemonic. This is a lesson of Gramsci, if you want. Antonio Gramsci was very important in Italian culture, but I think it's something that we can accept. If we think the period in which the architectural language was unified, for instance, was Man Paris, Victorian London. So also in Boston, Bacon and so on, you have to recognize that this was a period in which a class, the bourgeoisie, was hegemonic, culturally hegemonic, and then the language was unified. We were getting out of this situation, of this social situation. The society was individualizing every day more, and we had to take an account of this. So my idea, but also the idea of Gregotti was not the same, was that we had not to push for one language in architecture. Gregotti is using its own language. We too will, but that is not the problem. That is something that we are proposing, imitate it, copy it. That is nice, but that is not the problem for the city. For the city, the problem is what is in between the different objects. The space that is in between, that is normally is a public space. And we had to recognize that during the 20th century, we were unable to produce a public space at the same quality of the preceding periods. That the public space, except some exception, that is normal, but the public space that we produced during the 20th century was a disaster. From the point of view of architecture of the city, it was a disaster. And so we had to work on this theme more strongly, with a more and to profit of what? To profit of what the soil, the ground is suggesting. A city, also a city like Ireland. No, Boston is clear that it's not like this. It's never flat. There are denivelations, there are suggestions, there are something that is the past. That is suggesting how to work with the soil, with the space in between the different objects. And so I was very Fieldstone with the need of what I call progetto di suolo, soil project, the primary ground project. But this period, we didn't perceive that something was coming more important. That was more important. what I call it after. I call it the new urban question. We were supported by a very strong political engagement, social engagement and political engagement. We were observing that social inequalities were growing after the 70s in the European city were growing every day more. That the city was not this mythical space of integration and inclusion. It was becoming a space of exclusion, segregation, where poverty and richness were confronting themselves in a very hard way. Problems that now, and we were aware that what was happening in the architecture was not giving an answer to this kind of problems. And so after in 1996, the political situation in Italy changed, and practically it was impossible to work in Italy. Also, Paola and me decided to go outside, and so Casabella changed. We were pushed away, and our partners told me that I was not the road they were looking for, and so we agreed that. But in the same time, we had at the time, after 96, we had at the time to reflect about the situation, how the situation evolved during this year. And we understood that first, the social problems in the European city are more important than we perceived it during the period of Casabella. That we need to think, to cross the scales, continuously to cross the scale. There is not a preference bottom up or top down. No, that is a simplification. No, we have to cross continuously the scale from the small object to the big scale, from the big scale to in the same project. We have to go up and down continuously. That we have to insert our project in a spatial structure. That we are in a situation on one side like the bricoleur of Lévi-Strauss on one side, and on the other side we are observing social practices that are suggesting, like in Foucault, and are suggesting something. We have not to renounce to the problem of modernity. We have to think to a new modernity. Habermas was influencing us. So you see that the attempt was to link our idea of the project, the territorial project, the city project, to the mainstream of European culture. But I have to say that this was not something that was generalized in Europe. And I have to say that now we tried. We maybe Paola will show something. We are very satisfied that in many cities they are thinking that this idea to work different scales, to produce at the same time a vision of the future of the city and some projects of that have an operational content. So it's an idea that's now, I will not say pervasive, but it's adopted by many cities. Paris adopted this, Brussels adopted this, Moscow adopted this. The idea have to work, to go on maybe, but So I think that, to conclude, there was a period that was 80s and the first part of 90s in which the debate in Europe was very, very interesting. Casabella had a role in this debate. And let me say that we had a role. After there was a period in which, on the contrary, everyone was going in different directions, and there was no conclusion. Yes. Now something is, I hope, something is coming new. That is now we are understanding in Europe, now I'm speaking of Europe, that we can act with an architectural object of very high quality, but we have to insert this object in a structure that is legitimized. And we have, our job is to legitimize this, to give the criterion why, and your job is this. What is necessary to do things that are legitimized. That is a different story that could be your story, not my story. I hope so.
Thank you. Thank you. Paola?
We go on.
Sure.
Well, I will try to be very quick, but hoping not to produce the effect of too many images, because my idea was not to commend the project, it was just to leave the project going on, not as a show, but in the sense that the project should speak by itself. Anyway, now I will try to give very short comments. And I have not put any slide about plans we did in Italy during the 90s. Very beautiful, I have to say, things that were completely unuseful and completely ineffective in the concrete change of the situation. So I start from some projects in that period, as Bernardo was saying, which we decided that Italy was not anymore a good place where to work. So we started to make projects in other regions of Europe, for example in Flanders, where we spent a lot of time. And this is the cemetery we did, and for us it was maybe the first time to work on the idea of a public space in the diffuse city. What does it mean to imagine a place of collective places where people can have different kind of practices? The fact that this is a cemetery, you have not to imagine that is so stigma. We found even lovers in the cemetery. We find people that go there just to have a sandwich. I mean, it's considered a place, a comfortable place where to stay and where to share something in these beautiful landscapes of waves, in which one of the main questions was to clarify that the Flanders territory was not flat at all. So where maybe this is a sort of, for us, it was a manifesto of a descriptive project. What does it mean?
You see Giacometti there?
What does it mean to have a project that has an explicit objective, the one of describing a site? So now I have not the time to go into detail, but maybe later if you want we can go back. And it became also an incredible place of also where individuals are showing something together with this sort of collective integration in the landscape. So I go quick, just in Mechelen, so another Flemish city between Antwerp and Brussels, we won a competition for a system of squares, and that was interesting. It was not just one place, but was practically all the public spaces of the center of Mechelen. That is very much, the image of this city is very much related to this fantastic cathedral. It is one of the most beautiful Flemish cathedral, a monument. And so you see this beautiful sort of arch that is connecting three spaces that you see here. And the condition was very interesting. I'm sorry, I'll go quick, but you see some First of all, Mechelen was, the center of Mechelen was practically abandoned by the original inhabitants. Only immigrants were inside the city center. So the work on the public space for us, it had a very clear political engagement. The idea is that the public space can change this kind of segregation and heavy political conditions. The design we choose was a very minimalistic design. I think it's difficult to do less than that. That's a square. There was a parking space that was organized by engineers, so we had to work on top of the engineers with a lot of difficulties. And the idea was that you were discovering this incredible space, just getting out of the parking, and we decided for a non-designed square, in a way, with no direction, in which people could cross different ways. Only the pedestrian ramp coming out from the parking. Imagining that also parking had to have equality. The second square was a square close to the schools, so sort of a place for people, students to meet, and we decided for this red concrete with the idea was also of a fun place where the students could. And the third one was practically coming on top of the old cemetery of the city. So we wanted to maintain a sort of meditative memory of this place. And again, a parking was organized in the underground, always made by other engineers. And we organized this very calm space close to the cathedral that had this role of providing a space of silence, a space of meditation. A little bit inspired also by the old Béguinage tradition that are in the Flemish city. In Rennes, we are working since 10 years now, so it was a very big project on military areas and industrial areas, where the question was that we were working on top of incredible certification of infrastructures, objects, platforms, concrete, etc. So we try to read this place in a topological way, reading this. And finally, we provided a project of public spaces of different kind, in which also this sort of friche, these abandoned areas, didn't need to be completely modified, but could be integrated into the new project. And developing a variety of typological spaces that are today developed by architects and promoters. And we are realizing all the public spaces inside this space. And you see some fragment of these public spaces. For us, I think in this place, this is just the renovation of a small valley that is crossing our area. Using all the traces, this was an old railway, and we discovered that in this place, for example, the collective memory was so important, because at the moment in which the Nazis were still fighting in France, and the day after, practically, the war was declared concluded. So the day before, they left trains with a train full of people that were sent into Germany, in Dachau. So it was like a train going with the freedom coming back, with the peace in the back. And so these are traces that became very, very important, on which we are working. And reusing, of course, the materials from the excavations, the polluted materials that are retreated, etc. For us, this is also a way to work on an idea of public space that is not a disciplinary space. In France, this is something very, very strong. The public space is the place in which you are dressed up. And I think we have to fight against this. I think the public space has to be the place where you can conquer a freedom of movement, a freedom of meeting people, etc. In Antwerp, as Bernardo was saying, the idea of renovatio urbis, I think, also touched a little bit the limit, in the sense that renovatio urbis was not enough. There was a problem of a vision for the city. Renovatio urbis, the idea of changing some areas and imagining that some projects could really revolve the situation, was proving not to be effective, and we thought on the contrary that every project had to be inside a vision for the city. That was something we constructed together with the city of Antwerp, and that was shared, and that's why this project was important and successful, because it was a sort of collective project in a city that had a lot of conflicts, social conflicts, political conflicts, and today is not the best moment to tell this, because after many years of sort of continuity of the policy, today, in the last elections, a new nationalistic mayor has just won the elections. A mayor that wants to divide Belgium. This was the first project we did in Antwerp. It was a project of a park in the poorest part of the city. Again, a part in which only immigrants were living. And I have to say that many people were convinced that this park would have been a failure because of this poverty in which it was integrated. But
and they were saying, how you do a park?
Yeah, you are idealistic, these are things of the 70s. Well, at the end, this park proves that it could be more open than the type of city that was around it, and it is today studied even by sociologists as a case of incredible sort of mixing people, etc.
They are going there to get married.
Yeah, there are also weddings in the park, so it's a nice situation. I'm sorry, I go very quickly here. So that was a little bit the plan in which those projects were integrated. And one of these projects in Antwerp was a theater plain square, in which a very big space was not a true collective space. So that's why we produced this drawing for the competition, saying that we had to find the possibility in this big square to recover an attractivity for the city center, and that's the square. A square that is today working in many different ways, and being also the theater square is used by the children theater with activities, etc. The idea that this vision for a new modernity, as we say in the case of Antwerp, was then realized through a series of strategic spaces on which all the administration of Antwerp decided to invest. So a new team was created just to implement all these projects, and it was quite exceptional, I have to say. And that's at least the book we produced on that. So at that moment, I think we had started to work on the scenario construction, because we felt at the beginning, at the end of the 90s, that in fact the approach of piece by piece or modification was not enough anymore, and that there was a problem of really going through different hypotheses for the future. And we worked a lot, many years, on the diffusivity of the Veneto region, in many occasions on this scenario construction. And after some years, so in 2008, there was this incredible attempt to define a vision for the Great Paris. And we worked on the idea of a project of porosity, so on a vision of a new porous city in the case of Paris. I have not the time to go through it, but just to show you the three visions we have worked on, the three main visions we have worked on. The second is for Brussels. We described and we proposed a project for Brussels as an horizontal metropolis, and here I think is a fundamental point. The horizontal territories will play a very important role in the future. So, after having studied all the process of dispersion and diffusion, we think now that we are ready for the project for this kind of territories, accepting their characters, their characteristics, but knowing also that they are going through very important problems. Not last the big flows of immigrants that will arrive in this territory in Brussels, for example, in the next future, and knowing that the centers of the city are becoming real enclaves, a little bit like here, in which the poverty is clearly in the center. And so these are some of the models we propose to work on the future in terms of, as I said to my students here, as Berger was saying, in terms of concrete description of future situations, very concrete description. This is a carpet we are doing for Brussels, showing this project of isotropy. It will be realized as a 4x4 carpet describing this situation. And to conclude, Moscow was an incredible adventure. The idea of a city that is growing, 11 million, that is growing, that has extended its borders, and that is thinking to delocalize many of its functions, public functions. So we proposed to work on between the existing city and this new expansion, putting a big part in the middle. So that was something completely crazy in the sense that all the other teams didn't do that. But we were very convinced that a big collective and public space at the center of this sort of new city was fundamental. It was also a system of hills. And then the existing city was merged with the new one, but inside an idea that is the idea of a civic magnificence. That maybe we have to go back to the idea that the urban space represents a society. Civic magnificence is the idea that there is a magnificence in the space that is the representation of that society in that space. And maybe today we have to go back to this idea that we can represent something in the space. And I think I will conclude here just with some of the images. And that's all. I wanted to conclude by quoting, because in the articles, they are, of course, still, I think, very dense. And I like in particular the one, the conditions are no longer the same. I think that this is an article that can be read today with, something talking about today. And there is an article about the reconstruction of the city that Bernardo wrote about the Berlin experience of those years. That for me is quite interesting because he was criticizing the critical reconstruction of the city proposed by the Berlin architects in the IBA experience. And he's writing the new research project, unless it builds a dialogue with a possible new social order, will lack any justification and be illegitimate, a pure exposition, an unknowing exhibition of the many possible private wisdoms, a reductive modification. So I think that this for me is really talking also of today. And the question of the theory, why we need the theory, is exactly, I think, a different theory from the past. It's exactly because this problem is still not closed and it's not concluded, and each period needs to elaborate different theories, of course.
Well, thank you both very much. I think you figured this out between the two of you to make sure that we have very good timing. I think it will be very important to open this up as quickly as possible. I just want to ask for a couple of clarifications, just because of the relationship between the writings in the 80s and then really the idea of the project. So maybe there are three things, there are two things, but maybe the relationship makes it three. One is really about the question about the status of writing. Because I think that's something that I think is very important about the declaration of Casabella, the argument of Vittorio at the beginning of each issue, and then your various positions, is that there is an important position that's given to writing as a project. It's not that there is some theory only, but that there is something specific about writing. And I'm just wondering how you feel about this situation, the condition of writing, because somehow then I feel, as you conclude with 96 and then your departure from Casabella, that there is also a certain kind of disappointment. If I could, that's what came through. You could say it's not true, but what came through, there's a kind of disappointment that this is all writing. Maybe it's some of it is good, like now we are doing projects, and then there's a kind of valorization of the project and the importance of the project, which is obviously, good to recognize. But I'm wondering if you could somehow, in a way, speak about this difference between writing and the project. And ultimately, it's interesting that Paola, you referred to a quote from 94 or whatever, that there's a reference to writing, there's a reference to the text as a basis of an argument. Therefore, I would say there's something very important about the concept of an argument, of argumentation, of arguing, in a way, as an active mode, especially in the context of a school where the projects are also very much part of that argument. So maybe you could clarify, Bernardo, how you feel about writing today. Do you write in the same way? Do you think this was too idealistic in this reference that was made? And how is the project something that is different from writing?
No, I have to say first that I like because it is obliging me to clarify. And the project is not only something that you show, and maybe you convince what you're doing, so you have to clarify to yourself why you did this. And writing is very useful. And I like to write because I like to write. Let's say, how to write. We are writing in a different way, but secondly, I have to say that during this period, I was working, because I always work on the project. I was working to two main projects. The first one was concerning the Siena, then the historical city, the medieval city, accidents. And it was the opportunity for me to see if I was able to design the historical city of Siena and the outskirts, getting out of a conservationist history is important, but finally we are using these materials. Back to my idea for different materials, we are using these materials in a different way. Siena was built for people that was very different from us. And now we are using the same materials. So that is a problem. Why we can use, we like to use this historical material, this material that have a history, being different. And this was the opportunity for me to reflect about the necessity of history. And I have to say that if I say history is not necessary, it's too strong. But maybe we are obsessed, especially in Europe, we are obsessed by history, and we don't take a critical distance from the history. And that was the first problem. The second problem I was studying in this period was for a small city, a very nice city, in the central Italy. The name is Iesi. Maybe you know this city because of the theme of Scream was coming from there. And what was this city? It was made by different parts, built in different periods, in different historical. In each one of these parts, there was an idea of the city. It was not only something that grew up in a different period, but they were designed. They were representing an idea of the city. The idea of the city of the 19th century, the idea of the city of the modernist period, the idea of the city of interwar period, and that was interesting. And there we were influenced, because I have to say that when they gave me the prize for the urbanist, I told her, I am what my teacher produced. Nothing more. And so in this period I was very influenced by a French mathematician, that was René Thom, and then this idea, this theory of the catastrophes, that one part of a city that is morphologically defined in a very clear way meet another part of the city that is that has a different morphology. There is something. There is a problem. But the problem is not to link, to find a mediation. The problem is to reflect of the differences of these two parts and to transform this line, maybe this side, in a new part of the city. And that was one theme that was concerning, especially was concerning the growth of the peripheries in European cities, because of the problem. Also the theory of modification was not only concerning the historical city, it was concerning mainly the periphery of the European city. How we can, in this kind of city that nobody likes, how can we insert something that is modifying the situation, but not inserting a diamond in your trash because of that you lose the diamond. No, inserting something that is modifying the situation. And that was so writing, explaining, trying to justify, trying to say which are our references was for me was very important. And I have to say that in this period we had we were lucky because Gregotti is a very good writer, different from me, and Gregotti was a very good writer. So, and me too.
Thank you. So can we open this up? I'm sure there'll be.
So I stress the necessity to write. No.
Please.
Yes, I have a question.
If you can speak up, because I don't know if this mic will pick up.
Legitimization, that there is a need to legitimize an intervention or proposition, that would imply some conceptual consensus in a collective scale that could agree or disagree. But so my question is the possibility of legitimization of architecture now in where we are more and more plural in terms of discourses. How do you find that possibility?
Yeah, that is a very good question, because the problem today, the problem is just a discipline. If I can very, very shortly, very roughly also, there's something about the legitimation. There were three main in the modernity, three main ways to legitimize the project. The first one is the hegemony of a class, bourgeoisie that is building his own city. And this was a pervasive approach during the second half of 19th century and the beginning of 19th. But you have to remember that at the end of 19th century, our democracies had a crisis, a very strong crisis. A crisis very similar to the crisis that the democracy has today. That is, people was not convincing that this was the best way to solve the problem. Because corruption, because the spoil system in the US and so on. There is a very nice book about this I suggested. And somebody suggested to create a body of civil servants that were caring of the public idea of public welfare, let's say. Somebody was Woodrow Wilson, somebody that you have to use because it was a president of the US.
Woodrow Wilson.
And he was a lawyer, he was a professor. And that was an idea that was kept by the modern movement. And the architects of modern movement were convinced that they were proposing something that was general. When they were saying the surface of the window has to be in a certain relationship with the surface of the room and so on, they were saying this is a general statement, is a public truth, something that is so true that nobody can contest this, and that is a general interest. Today we have some doubt on the possibility to have an idea of the general interest. Why? Because the society is more complex, more articulated, the differences in the society are greater than when the society was a class society, you know. And so we have a true problem to legitimize what we are doing. And what is my suggestion? My suggestion is to try to clarify why you are proposing something that you pretend to be legitimizing, and to expose this by writing and by and to leave this to the public debate, because
anybody else? Any other questions? Just going to come to you, but I'm just wondering if we can take a couple at the same time. If you, please, you go ahead and then maybe. Thank you. Yeah, please.
So I want to ask something about the.
Can you speak up because there's a lot of.
I want to ask you something about the image of the city that you so much talk about. So in my mind, this perceived image of the city that we have is a constant opposition against the reality of the city. So we're trying to impose an image of the city that we have as an ideal against the reality of the city, right? So what you presented in this project in Sweden, remember? So you twice referred to a city as an abandoned site only used by immigrants, and you wanted somehow to change that. And my question is, why do we perceive the historical downtown always, the European downtown always as the gem of the city that has to be the bright side of the city, and we cannot accept the reality of the city that could be the...
I agree with you. I agree with you. I agree.
Okay, so
completely.
how a design that how a super minimal design kind of engages with that issue and tries to, I mean, what is the goal of this minimal design?
Yeah.
So
Maybe
maybe Paola can answer, but maybe we can also take another question behind you.
Sure.
So,
Yeah, I mean, I think that sort of dovetails nicely with what I was going to ask about. And you refer in various ways to this notion of sort of softness and hardness, or durability and malleability in these different types of spaces. And there's, you know, in some of the writings, there's reference to these gaps in interstitial spaces, these spaces of transition or conflict. And I'm such as typified by those sites that were brought up in the previous question. What I'm curious about is this question of time in relation to those kinds of spaces, or that qualification, where there are sort of multiple degrees of softness and hardness embedded in those sort of in those spaces at a particular moment. But say a soft space may be sort of harder in a longer duration, being maintained in a particular way by a developer, say. So it's in this sort of constant state of non-development or indeterminacy, and that's actually a structural strategy. So how to intervene in those types of spaces, which are more and more typical of the city, particularly in terms of these economic transformations that you're discussing.
It's a very complex question.
are you guys clear with the questions?
Yeah.
More or less.
More or less, because it's very complex. But
Even ambiguities and misinterpretation can be very interesting. So, no, I'm sorry, I do not agree with your point that we have to accept reality. I do not agree. I do not accept reality. I fight every day against reality. Sorry, no, but that's absolutely fundamental. And I can say, being a woman, I fight every day against reality. I'm sorry. So in that case, the Mechelen. But I want to clarify that there is. We are not talking.
The meaning of the question is different.
So, no, the point. Maybe I was a bit too quick about the question of minimalist design and immigrants. It's not a kind of linear relation, but the question of having part of the city being the center or being the periphery is not a problem. In Europe, is a new thing. It's not like in the US where the poor are in the cities. In Europe, it's not like that. It's something more recent, and we have to understand why this is happening. And even in the rich, Flemish, productive landscape, this beautiful diffuse city in which everybody lives with a very high quality of life, there are problems in the city center. So it's not a problem of gems or not gems, it's that there are problems there. And they can become much worse in the next future. And it was important that this part of the city was not completely out of the practices. What was happening in fact, because the places were simply not used anymore. And I think that it was important that the mayor decided at a certain moment to invest to requalify those areas, which was not a project of gentrification, absolutely, because the immigrants remained where they were. It was just taking care of some degraded sites in which I think a project had to be inserted. So the minimalistic approach is simply to say that we usually try to have spaces not so much charged of any, in amount of layers of conditions that you are imposing on space. We are trying to make spaces with less conditions as possible, in the sense that you don't design too much, you leave spaces that are a little bit vague, and many things can happen there. We try to do that as a sort of logic. That's only one part of the question. You can answer to the second part.
No. There is a link between the three questions started from what our problem is that we don't know which kind of sociability we have to produce in today's society. We have some problem to tell which is sociability. That was a very clear concept when the society was dominated by bourgeoisie, or when the class society and you have the working. Now it's very difficult to say which is sociability and which is the space that is more adapted to produce sociability. Public space more adapted to. We have to accept some degree of the reality. The case of diffused city is a very important case, because in Europe, till some years ago, 3-4 years ago, everybody was saying, the diffused city is a disaster. And in fact, it is not very good. It's not very nice, the diffused city. But the problem is that we have to accept that the 40% of the European population is living in the diffused city. I mean, single family detached houses in the country. And I refuse to think that this 40% of the population is made by idiots. They have good reasons to go there. What is lacking is a project for this kind of space, for this kind of the city. So we have to accept that this phenomenon is an important phenomenon. We have to investigate the reason of this phenomenon, and something we told about this, and we have to prepare a project for this situation. That is our job. Not when I was saying we need radical projects. Radical in the sense, get out from the idea that this is a disaster, this is a very bad city. Get out from this idea. Try to work with this. Try to produce something that is substituting what is happening now.
We have maybe there are 3 people who go. If you can be brief so that we can get more people. Thanks.
I have a little more of a pragmatic question, and it's where, in your opinion, does the written discussion about the city take place post Casabella? And in your opinion, what is the Casabella of today? And if that doesn't exist,
that's 3 questions.
what are the conditions? Well, what are the conditions in terms of creating a venue? Because it's very focused now. Yeah.
These are very selfish questions.
They're very selfish questions.
Because Ben is now thinking about so many of these things, so he's asking the public.
I'm thinking about, right now we don't have the sort of venue in which we come together. And I love the idea of coming together on the Saturday morning. We have a diffuse venue of publishing where it's on the internet. Where it's
our design magazine. That's what you're
I have an appointment with Professor Secchi here privately.
But anyway, so that's one question, is about
question.
the locality
Yes.
of this kind of culture and discourse.
I have a very pragmatic question, because you are working in Europe. I'm from Europe, I'm from Poland. I'm a practitioner, teacher as well. And when you are talking about the project, starting from west, let's say between Paris and Moscow, and you are showing these delicate forms and delicate high culture, minimalistic, let's say, and you are talking about your project in Moscow. How do you feel I would love to hear some comments.
About
How you are dealing with this lack of the spatial culture, how you are transforming this, how do, because this is, Poland is not Russia.
This is not a fact.
Good. That's a tough question. And then the last one there. And then.
I wanted to ask about this. You were just talking about the diffuse city, and how that debate is situated within this sort of recent critiques of compact city ideas. Because since the 60s, when these ideas of the territory, when De Carlo and Gregotti were already talking about these ideas, Rossi was criticizing them as sort of excuses to scroll and do sort of large-scale projects, and that's what they understood their program was. So it's to me it's ironic that that in fact what you're suggesting is that these design tools could be useful in actually organizing that to sort of a different understanding of a compact city, perhaps, because you're saying that that kind of diffusion actually is not really working out. At least that's what I understand.
So, who's going to answer first? You answer.
About Casabella.
About Casabella.
Yeah.
That is not dedicated to but Casabella now is not very important. It is not important and amazing because there is no debate about architecture of the city. And this is a very strange because Casabella is made by people that are teaching in Venice, in my school, and what was the specificity of Venice school was that architecture was always put on the background of the city. They forgot this. They forgot this, and they are producing images. And for me,
maybe there is something to say about that period. That was also a period of concentration of power.
Yeah.
I mean, this kind of power we're talking about, some being director of a magazine and publishing a review. Because Bernardo in that period was also the director of Urbanistica. So the two major Italian magazines were in the hands of more or less a very, very small group. And then you can see the limits and the interests. I mean, the limit is that Cazabella, and in a sense also Urbanistica, after some years, they said what they had to say. So, I mean, the discourse was closed. And at a certain moment, Cazabella was not understanding that the world was changing. Maybe not Bernardo or Gregotti, but the world of Cazabella was in a way not closing themselves inside. And so that's a limit. The good part of this story is that if you have people that have something to say, they have the occasion in that moment, because of the concentration of media power, to be influential, because they were influential, of course, in that period. So maybe you need
so maybe like any oppositions like Casabella, they all have their times. They have their times, and the projects wrap up, and then there's something new. So you create something new.
yeah. And after the second part of your question, there is a site where you can do. There is no. What you know in this period, we Gregotti and a new way of teaching us, but we were not Venetian. So in the evening, we had the evening free. And what was happening that we were meeting and
so it's a different informality. You can have a very good magazine if you have a lot of informal.
Now there is not decided. We tried in our offices to have a ceremony in which we discuss, but it's not the same. It's not the same. And that was we try in the school to have a debate, master classes, and so on. It's not the same. The second question question. Let me say that to enter in the Russian culture is very difficult. But because maybe you are right, that they don't understand that they have not the idea of to intervene in the space, and the other space as we have. But when we touch passion, we perceive the contradiction and that's the culture. And what was satisfying us is that people in Moscow told us, you understood what to say. I don't believe that they do but it's a very difficult problem.
But in the case of Moscow, I think we have to say, for us it was a discovering. We knew already the Soviet city, but I mean to understand and to also to practice and to see how people were living there and using this space and how this space is evolving. Also, is very interesting. And we had to put in the discussion the fact that the Soviet city is much better than what is produced today. So that there is a heritage there, and the theme of civic magnificence has something to do also with that. The investment in the quality of spaces at different scales and in different parts, in infrastructures, in the collective spaces, it was made in the Soviet period. I'm sorry, it's still waiting for understanding and maybe also learning something from it. And what is realized today is absolutely out of any qualitative idea of space. Is simple speculation, crude speculation. So I think that this work of understanding is not just some beautiful architecture of the 20s. It's not. It's really the massive normal city that was constructed by the Soviet in the Soviet period that really wait for an understanding, because it's a generous city. Has a generosity that the contemporary city has not anymore. This doesn't mean that you have to, to ideologically share. It's not that the point. We have to start from the actual space, as it is today, as people like to live, for example, there, looking at the interventions in which they are restructuring, for example, the interior of the courtyards. They are, and you understand that there is something that in which we can invest. So for me, that was the most important thing. And the second was the relation with the open space, the forest that is really fundamental in this city, and to understand how they cope and live together. That's very important. And the diffuse city. What was the question of the diffuse city?
No, but the problem is that is we did not we Paola Viganò, but collectively we did many mistakes, and we started with the periphery after the war that were blamed, and we did understand that something new was happening in the European city. And after with the diffused city, but what my feeling is that we didn't understand the society, not the city. We didn't understand what was happening in the society. For instance, I read this morning in the newspaper that 89% of the Americans think to be middle class. Then has no meaning. Has no meaning when you say 80% of that middle class. The concept of middle class is unuseful, obviously. And on the contrary, in the debate, there is always a problem. The middle class is everybody. And so we did understand what was happening after the war in a European society, American society, but also in the American society, because also the suburbanization in the US was not understood. And so I think that we have to ask our colleagues, sociologists, economists, please tell us something that is useful. you know, I'm against the labor division. I think that in our field, for instance, planning, design, and so on, it's not working. It's not working. Excuse me, but I know that he agrees. I don't think that not all the research field and the project is a way to do the research are the same kind. Maybe if you think to the engineers, the specialization of the doctors, the specialization is very important. But for somebody that is thinking to the city architecture, landscape, and so on, no, the specialization is not so. And so, what is disturbing me is that sociologists and economists were concerning with the city told something very important during the 60s, and they told something very important, and it was useful for us. But after, it's very difficult to read something that is very useful for us. Useful not that is saying how to draw, but that is building a conceptual framework that we can use.
We have one last question. It better be good. No pressure.
So please, just two brief comments about your presentation, because I think that they are symptomatic of what is happening today in the city. One is about the absence of dialogue with engineers that you mentioned in all your projects in Antwerp, which is very curious coming from a culture like the Roman one, where engineers and architects seem to be the same ones. And it seems to me that the discipline of landscape is engaging with the much more language architects are. The other is the constant search for harmony in a cosmological way that is, in a way, inserting your presentation with music or mathematics. So how do you search that harmony between scales of objects in the city? And a very brief question, it is about the network, because I know that you have written a lot about the network in the Benetton region, I think. And how do you think that this idea of network breaks with these centers that are so dogmatic in a territory like Italy, with the horizontal dialogue that you are now proposing in Russia? Or is the network the solution for that kind of problem that engages the dispersed city, or is not just the solution?
No, I think that there is not one solution for all questions. For sure, the idea of horizontality I think is important, because when it was...
Sorry, Paola, I'm asking at the big scale, so at the scale of the territory, how that solves the question.
Yeah, when I speak of horizontality, I speak at all scales. I mean, it's a concept.
Of course it goes to all, yeah.
But because if you say network, it's not really enough. You know? The question of network is that you don't know anything about the hierarchy of the network. You know? So we are exactly discussing the hierarchy of the network. So you understand, it's not enough network.
Yeah.
Horizontality is more clear. And it's a question that has consequences in space, but it's mainly the result of a certain society and a certain way to construct that space. So in this sense, it's a very deep understanding we need not just of the physical environment, but also of the other social, cultural, economic layers. And we think that in this moment that the city has to be rethought in terms of horizontality, in terms of understanding that the new social order that was lacking that moment, a vision of a new social order, should be something connected to getting more horizontality. Because we have been through a period of incredible polarization, concentration, hierarchization. This is also the legacy of the modern project. Although we know that there is a sort of parallel history of the modern project that maybe was going in the direction of horizontality, but it has been a marginal story. Absolutely marginal. Just some cases that were put in. So the mainstream was modernity as a moment of modernization, the process as a moment of hierarchization. So after a long period spent on that, I think that we arrived to a sort of limit in which the conflict, the social, political conflict is exploding. And we have to go back to something more horizontal.
And
Also in
this
space.
was not concerning only, for instance, networks or also the relationship between the different fields of research. For instance, for us, there was a period in which economy was the leader, and urban was the consequence of what we were thinking about economy. Now, the spatial term saying, be careful, the space could produce something that we were discussing yesterday, the space arrangement, the space modification, the space transformation could modify economy. And that is important. After the Soviet Revolution, there was some artists that were called speculative, that were thinking that art has to be like a mirror of the society, and that has to reproduce like a mirror the society. Well, I suggest to think in an opposite way. In an opposite way. Society could be changed also thanks to the arts, and also thanks to that is the spatial term. That is, the space could introduce. It's not the definitive solution, but the space could be the design of the space, and the relationship with the other field of research. I like to speak with a mathematician, with economists, with a sociologist, and so on. But the relations are fundamentally based on the misunderstanding. And the misunderstanding is producing the novelty. Not the specialization. And that is important.
So, Paola, Bernardo, thank you very, very much. I hope that these conversations continue. As you can tell, Paola is, in a way, teaching many of these themes through the Department of Landscape Architecture. In one sense, we are a school that is very interested in these themes, these issues, and I think that it's very important to have your input, your feedback. We may not be Casabella, but I like to think that this is the moment here for us to really create the circumstance for these discussions and these discourses, not only because of the multiple aspects of the various departments of architecture, landscape architecture, and urban planning and design, but also because of the design studies programs, and then the relationship of these programs to the university. In a way, I think it's a fantastic moment and a great opportunity to really see this as a deliberate moment for the construction of what you're calling this new forms of radical rethinking about the city and radical ideas about practice. So I hope that the discussions continue and that we will see you reflecting on what everybody here is doing, and please keep this conversation going and let us know how we might be able to to accommodate more debate on these themes in the coming weeks and months. But anyway, thank you so much. I'm so happy that we could find out about 1984. Now, thank you very much.